Hi, Erik Linask here in the TMC newsroom, coming to you from the Miami Beach Convention Center here at IT Expo East 2011. And I'm talking this afternoon with Steve Flavell, who's a co-CEO at Ring2 Conferencing. Steve, thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming to IT Expo.
Thanks for doing the meeting.
So, as I said, Ring2 Conferencing, obviously you're in the conferencing business. Maybe start by telling me exactly what you do in terms of conferencing.
So we're in the world of audio and web conferencing and online meetings. And I guess in a nutshell, we're sort of trying to make that whole sort of everyday online meeting and conferencing experience a better experience. Just trying to get over things that are wrong with the industry and have grown up with the industry and have almost become like ingrained annoyances. We're all about trying to get rid of those. Mm.
So when you talk about the parts of the experience that aren't quite user-friendly or are annoyances, as you say, what's more important? Is it the ease of setting up and organizing and arranging a conference call, or is it the actual on-call experience?
So I think at Ring2 we really think of it as a whole experience and flow from end to end. So it starts with scheduling, then it's do you remember the call, then it's getting on, then it's knowing what's on once you're on. And there are so many things that are sort of ingrained frustrations when it comes to that experience. What are your dial-in details? Where have you put them? Maybe you want to invite somebody from France, and where on earth do you find the French dial-in number? People who forget calls, people who are late for calls, where are the dial-in numbers? Where did I put them? Those first few minutes, particularly when you're the host and you don't know who else is on, who's just joined, who's speaking, it can be quite a harrowing experience, almost a stressful experience, particularly for the host, who probably really wants to focus more on the meeting and the content, but has to worry about the call mechanics and what's going on. And that's what Ring2 is all about, changing that experience from scheduling through to end of call.
And how have you gone about that?
So I think importantly we've gone about it by starting from and recognizing what people do today. And what people do today is good old reservationless audio conferencing. So you have dial-in numbers and people dial into the call, and we start from there. So as the host, as soon as your first invited guest dials into your conference with Ring2, you get an alert. And you get an alert to your desktop, and you get an alert to your smartphone, and it sort of says, hey, someone's just joined your conference, would you like to see who that is? And when you click yes, you then have a representation on your smartphone application or on your computer desktop of all your guests who have dialed into your conference call. So it gives you that sort of visibility as to what's going on, and then an easy way to manage the conference from that point. That's more on the audio side, so you see who's on, you can add people, you can mute people, those sort of frustrations on audio, you then have a way to manage them that you've been led to as the host. You don't have to go and find that, you get an alert and you're led there. And that's the same approach that we're now using on web conferencing, taking the audio experience to the web, but leading the user there. So once you've got the host to that page where they can see who's on their audio conference, you just give them a super easy experience to press one button and turn it into a web conference call, which is I think a much less scary experience than many of the products on the market.
So you mentioned it, the mobile app. Is that something that users really require these days? The mobile workforce is only growing on a daily basis.
Yeah. So I think if you were to go and ask the average conference caller, do they need a mobile app? It's not the first thing that would spring to mind. What springs to mind is all the things that are wrong. The mobile app is kind of a by the way, it just happens to be the solution. But the important thing is solving those annoyances on the call. And so yes, I would say yes, they do need a mobile app, but it's how do they realize that? And I think the important thing about Ring2 is that method of realization. You don't ask the user to realize it, you just lead them there. And that call start alert is kind of the key step, because it takes, you get that alert and it says your conference has started, you want to see who's on, and you just click yes. So it's a very natural way to start using applications rather than having to go and open them and find them or go to a URL and log in, and none of that is needed.
Do you have any insight into what sort of the average number of parties is on a conference call these days?
Yeah, I think on average it's slightly shy of 4 is the typical amount. But I think it can depend as well on the nature of your business and if you do more internal versus external conferencing. But on average, it's just under 4.
Are there particular market segments or verticals that you're seeing leveraging conferencing services more than others?
Well, I think the fundamental point there is kind of no is the answer. I mean, it's such a cross verticals, everyday business activity now. So at the first level, I'd answer no to that. But there are some verticals that it's more important to than others. If you look at the professional services world, it's a very much an everyday experience with many characters in these firms spending hours a day on conference calls. And I think also for the large sort of multinational type enterprise now as well, probably more internal type conferencing, relatively speaking, in those organizations than perhaps in the professional services typical account, but both very strong users of conferencing.
And who's Ring2's target audience, target customer?
So our target, primary target customer is really the professional services market, the mid-market, the national sort of corporation. Companies that tend to have a high prevalence of smartphones because of the nature of our service as well. But also, I think importantly, companies that find it an important need to know who's on their conference calls. It's such a black box experience, and people don't really like it. You ask the typical conference caller what they think about the experience, and it's kind of, it's a pretty nonplussed reaction, and we want to change that. We want to make the conferencing experience from start to end just much more enjoyable and simpler, and so I think it's that sort of target company we go for that do conferencing on a very much an everyday basis.
That these days you can't really talk about conferencing without at least touching on video. And if I'm correct, it's not something that you currently do. Why not? And do you have any sights set on incorporating video?
So a couple of things. I think firstly, I think it would be wrong to say that there is clearly no value in having video on conference calls. I mean, to see people's body language on certain calls, I think is a very useful component. But, a couple of buts. So, first of all, on the everyday type conference call, people who are, say, on for 3 or 4 calls a day, and it's a regular part of their activity, do they want to be being videoed for 3 or 4 hours a day and have their every movement monitored whilst they're on all these conference calls? And I think that's probably a no is the answer. Most people would rather have the flexibility to be half doing something else at times, maybe, and video doesn't allow that. But there are certain use cases, I think, where it's very valuable. More specialist type use cases, interviewing, high-level boardroom to boardroom type experiences, but not so much the everyday one yet. Now,
and probably on the consumer side too.
Well, consumer side, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's probably often a one-to-one for video on the consumer side. People who want to see their family overseas. I think the multi-party thing is still very much a business thing, really, and I think video will come in more and more over time. But I think there are more important things to make better about the everyday business meeting at the moment than pushing to introduce video into the everyday business meeting. I think audio needs to be made better, and I think web needs to become more everyday. It's still like, it depends which analyst you talk to, but like 90+% of conferencing minutes are still audio only. I think that the big challenge for the industry is how to make that better, how to get more minutes with people screen sharing, document sharing first, where there's clearly a latent need, but people are currently defaulting to emailing out slides and stuff like that. Once that's done, then let's keep monitoring the need for video, but it's kind of not top of our list right now, but we're keeping an eye on it.
Understood, and personally I would agree on a lot of the points that you made regarding video versus audio. We've been talking here at IT Expo East 2011 in Miami with Steve Flavell from Ring2 Conferencing. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure. Pleased to meet you.